Hello, BookTube. Before we dive into our list of the 100 greatest books of all time, I thought I would go over three parameters that shape the list to one extent or another. Uh, we'll try to go through them quickly, but they are, I think, self-evident, which means that in the 21st century they need explaining. Parameter number one would be that although I have traveled widely and read widely, I am still a product of my own culture. I am a citizen of the United States of America. Some part of that may creep into this list. There may be a bit of regional bias. I will try my best to counteract that, but that might be there. Uh, Parameter number two is mainly meant for you internet historians who are finding this record who knows how far in the future. I am making this video in the second decade of the benighted 21st century, when, thanks to the ubiquity of social media and cell phones, people can not only construct their own alternate realities, realities that they prefer to live in, but also live in those realities. Just pull up stakes and live inside their alternate realities, where what they declare as true is true, even if what they declare as true is not true, because true would be real in the real world. Uh, with the result that other lists like this that you, the future internet historian, may look back and find from the second decade of the 21st century may include things like a conversation that I had last night, or a really good bike ride, or a really challenging parkour demonstration, or a bit of spoken poetry that you heard in WeHo. None of those things are books. When I talk about the 100 best books ever written, I'm talking about books. I'm not talking about anything else and simply declaring it to be a book. And parameter number three deals with what books we're finding at all. What books constitute the vast majority, the huge sea of possibilities from which we will pick our candidates. This, for you internet historians, you will also know that this was a bit of a touchy subject at this time in history. And it needs maybe a broader look just for a minute. I promise we'll get to the books in just a minute. It may need a broader look. Homo sapiens sapiens, the animal species to which you and I belong, modern Homo sapiens, has existed on Earth for about 200,000 years, give or take about 200,000 years. Writing and books have existed for about 6,000 years. A little bit more, maybe, but not much more. Which means that humans were heavily shaping their own environment and their own cultures and selves long, long before they got around to writing books. Which means those things will affect the books they wrote. It will affect the books we have. Granted, the books we have are also affected by the pitiless ratio of time, the destruction of manuscripts by fire, flood, mice, whatnot, pillage. But on the whole, the body of literature, the entire body of literature that we have, will for a long part of its history be shaped by those factors. And one factor that's worth considering here is that humans in the aggregate have always oppressed other humans in the aggregate. As far as we can tell, that has happened forever. Probably for the whole of that 200,000 years, probably for 200 million years before that in our ancestral line. In other words, if you have a group of humans behind a wall, and they take a liking to another group of humans' wall, they're going to take it. They're going to use force to take it. If you have a group of humans that has one particular concentration of melanin in their skin as a reaction to ultraviolet radiation in the air, talk about trivial. We might as well be talking about toenail shape. One group of humans with one particular skin color will often oppress another group of humans with a different skin color, different socioeconomic background, different material means. Do you have something I want, and am I able to take it, etc., etc. And that's not even talking about ideological reasons why one group of humans would oppress another group of humans. You don't think the way I think. You don't believe what I believe. And when I say oppress, I mean enslave. For a huge, huge percentage of that 200,000 years. What I mean by oppress is enslave, which means not that I'm paying you less than you wish I were in advance of our IPO, but that you are chattel. You are a barnyard animal. You don't have any rights at all. You don't exist or aren't allowed to exist separate from what your owner wants you to do. I will point out here, of course, that the most basal of all of those oppressions, the one that underlines all the others, the one that existed before those other differences even did exist, before there were 2 separate walled cities, before there were 2 separate or 5 separate skin colors, the one that underlines all of those is the fact that humans are sexually dimorphous species. This isn't true for many animal species on Earth. Many animal species on Earth, the differences, the physical differences, the morphological differences, to use the 25-cent word, between males and females is so insignificant that often members of that own species don't know the difference and have to go checking. And in some species, that difference is catastrophically huge. Females being 10 times the size of the males, or the male being 10 times as colorful as the female. In humans, the sexual dimorphism is relatively small. Men, the male of the species, are more aggressive, about 5% bigger on average, give or take, and they're twice as strong physically, on average, as the female of the species. It could be a lot worse. Call up a picture of an African elephant. You will see that those percentages are fairly mild. But, as I was mentioning, groups of humans will take any excuse to oppress other groups of humans. And from the beginning, before we were even human, that difference existed. You put 2 groups of humans together, and one group of humans realizes that it's twice as strong as the other group, that other group is going to get oppressed. Just plain and simple. It just is. It's going to get oppressed. And if that other group is oppressed, and here I mean women, they will be chattel slaves for 90% of human history, which means they won't be leaving work at 5, taking the commuter rail home and writing books. They simply won't be. They won't be educated. They won't be allowed to be educated. They certainly won't be allowed to write. They won't live out normal lives. They will live as beasts of burden. Now, I want to stress here, before we move on to the list, that I don't like that fact. I would like very much if the women in Periclean Athens were as free to write and have a publishing career as the men. But, getting back to factor number 2, they weren't. So, this list, in addition to maybe reflecting a little of my own regional native bias, is also going to reflect the fact that, as I have said many, many times before, there is no alternate canon. Writing is almost always a product of either leisure or privilege. And it is not done by slaves. It is not done by barnyard animals. There are exceptions, of course, but by and large, it is not. Certainly a literature is not generated by people who are not allowed to determine what they will think, what they will do, how they will be educated. You can't naturally write. You have to be educated to do so. You have to be taught how to do it. In other words, this list is necessarily going to reflect the works of the people doing the oppressing, because they're the ones who did the writing. I don't like that fact, but that is the fact. That is reality. So we're going to stick to that. This is not going to be an alternate canon. And it's not even going to be a canon at all, because some of these things, I'm sure, we will encounter books that have been forgotten, that are not taught in schools, which seems to be what the canon has devolved into. But we're going to go through these, and we're going to do them 10 at a time. So we're going to start with 100 and go to 91. I just wanted to get those parameters out of the way so that if you're coming to this list expecting an alternate canon, you know not to watch. You know not to watch this video, and also not all the others that are coming. There is no alternate canon. This may be tilted a little bit towards, for instance, the English-speaking world, because that's the culture I come from. And it will only deal with books. Okay, it won't deal with, that avocado toast meal that I made the other day. was a book. No, it was a book. No, if you don't say it was a book, I'm going to get you fired from your tender job. No, and we're not going to do anything like that. We're going to deal with books. So, those factors out of the way, let's dive right in with number 100. This list will not be ranked except for number 1. Who knows how long down the line and who knows how many months we will get to number 1. And number 1 is the greatest book of all time. But the rest, it'll be vaguely ranked. The books that tend to be in this top 10, in this group of 10, probably will not be, generally speaking, as good as the ones, for instance, in 30 to 29, 30 to 21, something like that, but not generally. So we'll start off with something small. This is The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, a short novella. This is the great Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition cover with Mike Mignola cover artwork and flap artwork and spot artwork throughout. And you will know basically this book, whether you've read it or not. It's the best thing that Joseph Conrad ever did. Of course, I'm of the opinion that the less Joseph Conrad you read, the better he will be. The longer he gets, the more insufferable he is. This is not. This is dark and sticky. It will remain with you. It's an odd, imperfect, uneven, but disturbing book about consumption and power and obsession. Just there are quite a few books on our list this time around that are disturbing. Like, for instance, this next one. This is by Andrei Schwarzbach. This is The Last of the Just. His novel about many generations in a Jewish family, who each generation has its own representative of pure divine justice. And that representative has to bear witness to his own time. And it ends in Auschwitz. And it is harrowing. The first parts of this book maybe give you a place or two to hide, to escape from its own inexorability, but those places, they get hunted out by the author and evaporated one after another until by the end of the book you are just staring. You're just staring. It's a monument to hopelessness, but beautiful. Then we have Hannah Arendt. This is Eichmann in Jerusalem. This is her study of one of the, as she put it, the desk killers of the Nazi extermination regime. And this is a study also of, in a weird way, disappointment. Because in her mind, Arendt erects the pose that she is going into this trial expecting that behind the bulletproof glass there will be a slavering, fanged monster. And there isn't. There isn't. There's this mild-mannered, blind Mr. Magoo type figure who was nevertheless responsible for staggering evil and knew it. And this is a marvelous short book that etches what you get from that. What chills will result from that. Then we have a short book, talk about imperfect. This is a book, when I have taught it, I have taken the almost unprecedented step when teaching a work of great literature of telling students to skip the first part of it. And I don't know that I would do that now for this list, but this is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which, its opening segment notwithstanding, is extremely powerful and beautiful. One of the most beautiful things that had been written in American literature up to this point. Sumptuous, even though, like a couple of other items so far that we've seen, fairly hopeless. It's a fairly grim story that all of you will be familiar with, but I wonder how many of you have read it as adults. Then a work of history. I have often said that readers tend to discount works of history that are older. I don't know why. I guess because we figure history is a means for delivering facts and nothing else. But that lets history off the hook. History is a kind of writing, like anything else. If all we expect of it is that deliver facts, we will allow bad or boring history to enter into the tent, and we shouldn't do that. This is a great work of history. It is beautifully, wonderfully, powerfully written, and I'm not overly concerned with whether or not some of its factual conclusions have been contested or even overturned. It's the reading experience that I'm talking about. This is William Hickling Prescott, and this is his book, The History of the Conquest of Mexico, which is an all-encompassing narrative experience. This is a great narrative experience, regardless of whether or not his conclusions have been shaded in or nuanced or overturned in the more than a century since he wrote this thing. It's a great reading experience. It's a great work of history. Then we have a classic. This is a canonical classic. It's, to my mind, a little bit overlong and a little bit scattered. Some classics hold up, I think, better than others. Could be that I've simply read the wrong translation. I've read, I think, 2 translations of this work, and one of those translations I read very carefully, but 2 is not 20, and I can't read the original. This is The Water Margin, which has a number of different titles. It's a great Chinese classic. This is the cover of a recent reprint from Tuttle that I'm sure is still available. Maybe not whenever you're watching this video, but it's a big, chunky epic about a band of outlaws who come together in order to fight the state, or perhaps eventually join the state. It's wonderful character sketches. This is one of the most character-heavy works of the ancient world that I know of, that manages to make it work, that manages to make those characters more than just Punch and Judy caricatures. Truly with some wonderful set pieces in it. And then we have another novel. This is also a novel that is, I think, in my mind, characterized more by set pieces, 2 in particular, than by its effectiveness as a whole. But it's been a while since I read it, so maybe I would appreciate that effectiveness more if I did. This is Zola, and this is Jamanal. This is his masterpiece. I don't think I'm going out on a limb among French literature experts to say that he never wrote anything more effective than this, less self-indulgent than this. He indulges in some of his pet ideas about human behavior and human identity here, and human genetic payload even, but this is really a story of, a doomed love story, but also a story of disadvantaged workers, of downtrodden workers in a mine workers. And he brings you right into their world, right into their heart and the things that mean something to them, and also horrifyingly right into their world, their subterranean world, with an absorption that really works. It really, really does. I don't know. I've never read whether or not Zola set foot ever inside a mine. I would be willing to bet that he never did, but it doesn't matter. He makes you do it in this book. Then we have a collection of poetry. This is Elizabeth Bishop. This is her collection of poetry, North and South, which she labored over and which works as a book and has some... All the books that we've mentioned so far have more effective and less effective bits in them. And this does too. Any poetry collection will almost certainly be describable that way, and that is true here. There are more effective and less effective bits in here, but this is one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most successful volumes of poetry ever written by an American. And then we have a work of ancient history. This author may or may not appear elsewhere on this list, but for now we have the Annals of Imperial Rome by Tacitus, the Roman historian Tacitus, who brought to the annalistic approach to history, which is this year under these 2 consuls, this, and this happened. He brought to that approach to history a self-awareness of the act of writing history, and also a bitingly quotable wit that really comes across even in English. Tacitus has been lavished with good translators, so even in English you will get that this is not your ordinary ancient historian. The kind of plodding doodlefulness is not here. Instead, it's replaced with a sharp-edged awareness of the act of writing history. It makes this infinitely revisitable. Then we'll finish up the list with these. I found covers for some of these things that are Penguin classics, but you can find them in any kind of version. We'll finish up the list. We'll rocket forward 1,000 years from Tacitus to the Elder Edda, which is a marvelous compendium of Norse myth and Norse folklore, a marvelous collection of prose and rambling quasi-prose and verse, just delightful, and has had, like Tacitus, has had its share of wonderful translators into modern English. So if you don't want to, with any of these things, if you don't want to brave the original, there are translations that will work if you're an English-only reader. This is a world of adventure, but also full of, again, sharp and also sad human insight. It's a marvelous, marvelous work. So there you go. That is 100 to 91 of the greatest books of all time. Don't worry, the next installment I will not repeat the parameters. I will just go straight to the books. But what will the next 10 be? No, it'll be no surprise when this is a playlist. But for now, I'll see you next time and we'll find out together. Thank you, BookTube.